Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the recent support on all of our content, specifically the vlog. We have some shout outs to do. So thank you, Glitchy Zeke. Thank you, the Homelander 1750 and Xander Cade for showing huge love and support on the vlog. You know, they were commenting, liking. And as a reminder, that is up on our channel documenting our time, in Vegas for a portion of the Summer League. Basically, the most exciting part, Wemby's debut and all that stuff. So check that out from our point of view. And please, before we get started, don't forget to continue to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast. So yeah, this episode is gonna follow a similar format to the last one, but we do have to talk about something because the Summer League is officially over. It's been inked. It's been done. The Cleveland Cavaliers have won the Summer League championship. They won this game against Houston 99-78. So that was the NBA Summer League final. We just want to briefly talk about this because it is kind of important considering there are some guys that are pretty notable on both of these squads that played fairly well, I believe. So, starting with the winners, obviously we have Isaiah Mobley, brother of Evan Mobley for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He dropped a whopping 28 points, 11 rebounds, and he shot 12 for 20 from the field. So, we saw him play live, I think, twice in person, and, he looked pretty good. The shot is a little interesting. It's a little slow. It has a hitch, but that seems to not really be an issue for him. He seems like a dominant force, and I don't believe this is like his rookie year because I think, he was on the G League or something like that, and I think he had been called up a few times in last season, I believe. So, shout out to him. It seems like he's developing and turning into, a smaller version of his brother, offensively and defensively as well. Moving on down the line, we have Sam Merrill, who is a lights out shooter. He had 27 points, 8 for 14 from the field, but 6 for 12 from the three. So that's a great percentage. That's what you want to see. If you're Cleveland, I think they do need some help on the 3-point shooting. So, hopefully he gets a real contract, not a two-way. When we saw him play live as well, we were like, oh, holy cow, this guy doesn't miss. And then we're moving on to Imani Bates. He dropped 19 points. A lot of people are declaring him a big steal in the draft. I agree, but also, we have to see him play some real NBA action before we can really say that, I think. But, so far he's looked really good. Offensively, he's doing a lot. But I think this was probably his most well-rounded game. He shot 6 for 13 from the field, 2 for 6 from the three. But, he had 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal, 1 block. And that's something that you want to see from him because he has a notorious reputation for kind of being a one-dimensional score. Not one-dimensional score, but more of a one-dimensional player in terms of all he can do is really score. But I'm glad to see him take some leaps in some other categories, like I said, rebounds, assists, and steals. And that's pretty much it from, the Cleveland side. And then moving on to the Rockets side, Cam Whitmore, I think he's played phenomenal, especially since his debut. I think his debut was probably his worst game. But, he has, I think, the Summer League steals record now. So, I think he's a promising player. I think he's more of the steal of the draft. I think, considering that, he was a projected top 5, top 10 pick and fell all the way to, I believe, 20. So, that's a huge pickup for them. So yeah, he had 14 points, a little underwhelming. You want to see him do a little bit better, but nonetheless, I think this doesn't take anything away from his Summer League. Let's see who else. Honestly, that's really about it. I think Hinton also played pretty well. He had 18 points, 7 for 13 from the field, 10 rebounds as well. So that's pretty cool to see from a guard. I think Houston has a solid core, and I think both these teams do have a promising future in the season. But I mean, unless you have anything else to say about the Summer League as a whole, I thought I enjoyed it. I thought it was very good. I thought it had a kind of a different kind of feel to it and a different vibe than other ones in the past. I think obviously due to Wemby and some other promising young talent. Houston also did not have Amin Thompson as well. He was hurt. So I think, they probably could have played a little bit better if he was around because his brother's definitely been playing on a honestly borderline, young superstar level at this point. I don't want to, be an overreactor, but just from what I've seen. But yeah, overall, I think, both these squads played very well. Houston finished with a 5-1 record. Cleveland obviously went undefeated. So, shout out to both those squads. And I think, Summer League really doesn't amount to anything. This is not a reflection of the regular season or the postseason at all. But this is just a bunch of young guys. So both these squads do have some promising young guys, and I hope a lot of them get an opportunity to play for these squads. So what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, that's kind of how you have to look at it. When you're watching the summer league, you're kind of more so paying attention to see like, okay, is this guy any different than what I thought, from what he was when he was initially drafted, right?
Right.
That kind of, and it's not like you're looking for flaws, or whatever in a player, but like, are you seeing guys doing things that, maybe they didn't necessarily show off or flash in college? Like
Right.
like you mentioned with the Monty Bates, right? Where you're like, he's mainly a scorer. And that is kind of mainly what he showed for Cleveland, because even like defensively, he had some good defensive plays. He also had some other plays, where it looked like he was a little bit too light,
Sure.
in the shorts, defensively. But either way, right? Like, the question for him was, like you said, can he contribute in other ways, and other guys we saw, like you mentioned, like Sam Merrill, right? Who,
Hmm.
was just like a lights out shooter. And
Right.
that's kind of what he has to do if he's going to try to make an NBA roster, right? Because, he's kind of small ish, not super athletic, right? So, he's a guy where he has to basically be able to show he can shoot.
It's his fourth year as well.
Exactly. It's his fourth year, right? So he's not a super young guy, um, either. And also, like, for some of the other guys, like, that we saw in the earlier part of the summer league, right? Like Jabari Smith Jr., and Tari Eason, right? Those are second year guys, right? But they kind of showed, some flashes of improvement, which is a good sight, like you said, for Houston, because they're another
Yeah.
team that has, an even younger core than Cleveland. Just because, like, they have some guys like, Van Vliet and Dylan Brooks, right? But like no real superstars, right?
Right.
Or like super all-star level guys, right? Like, Cleveland has Donovan Mitchell, to kind of like, set the table, whereas Houston is kind of relying on, some guys that are in a lower tier.
Right.
Uh,
Like Jalen Greens and
yeah,
Kevin
exactly. But
Porter Jr.
like you said, the vibe definitely for the first week of summer league was very high. I believe I saw, numbers wise, that I think it was the second most watched summer league ever, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken. I'm assuming, I guess number one was probably the 2017 one. I think that's
Right.
the one with like the Lonzo,
Yes.
Ingram,
That
Kuzma.
one had a lot of hype around it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, either way, obviously that shows that the summer league, was very popular, and it's definitely become like a growing, event in the NBA.
Yeah.
Honestly, like I would almost kind of argue, like, it may have like a crazier vibe than like say the All Star Weekend, only
I
just
agree.
because, yeah, like only just, and also like it's much easier to get to,
And this
right?
is like the one of the only times in the year where like you see a culmination of fans, around the country coming to one spot, like you said with the All-Star game. So I feel like they're kind of on the same level, like you said, if not more, more hype around it.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And yeah, yeah. So, and like you mentioned with Houston, shout out to Cam Whitmore. I believe he won like the regular summer league
yes, he
MVP.
did.
And again, that was a guy, that we had in our mock drafts definitely higher than he ended up going.
Yeah.
Although I don't think we had him quite as high as like what he was projected before he was dropping.
I had him at 5 actually.
Okay,
I had him going to Detroit over the Thompson twin.
I think I had him at like 6 or something like
Okay.
that. So I mean, like, but either way, he went lower. So at this point, it's kind of up to him, to kind of show that like the teams that passed up on him,
Yeah.
were wrong to do so. Because again, he's got some really good skills. He's a
Hmm.
really good athlete. So you just kind of hope that it works out, right? And again, like Houston's an interesting place, for him, right? Because they just happen to have two first round picks, and they were kind of far apart, right? They took Amin Thompson or Amen Thompson or whatever at 4,
Yep.
and then they took Whitmore at 20, basically. So
Yeah.
so hope so again, he showed some signs in summer league, but like you said, you do have to kind of wait and hold up and see what happens when the regular season, the real
Right.
competition starts. Just because we've seen guys in the past play very well in summer league and then not live up to expectations
Exactly.
in the NBA, at the regular season level, and vice versa. We saw guys that were terrible in the summer league and then, turned out to be like Trae Young. Again, he was
Sure.
awful in the Vegas summer league. I think that was 2018. That was the year I think I was there,
Okay.
the first time, and he was awful. And now he's a multi-time All Star. So
Right.
you just never know. With the summer league, you just kind of just hope to see growth. I think
Yes.
that's the biggest thing. Just
It's a baseline for a
yeah,
lot of people.
exactly, exactly.
So if they can build on that, it's phenomenal.
Right. So I guess now, we'll kind of move on to our next team
Hmm.
overlook so far. And again, like these are kind of like early, looks at these teams because some of these teams, have the potential to change between now and, the start of the season. And then, some of these rosters may be very different
Right.
by the time the trade deadline rolls around. We'll see. But, we're gonna go and move on into Golden State, right? So obviously, they were a team, that won the title 2 seasons ago, right, in 2022,
Hmm.
looked like they were on top of the world, right? Had that mixture of, the current veteran stars, like Steph, like,
Yep.
Draymond, like Clay, and even Wiggins, mixed in with like some other really young guys, right? Like Jordan Poole. They were hoping to get stuff out of Wiseman, Kaminga, Moody, and then everything kind of came crashing down last season, right? It kind of started off with the tumultuous summer, right, where Draymond Green punches Jordan Poole,
That was
right?
the beginning of the end.
Yeah, they had some big back and forths apparently, and it was building, right? You know what I mean? Like it had built up to that moment, but it was still unfortunate. And then obviously we know what made it worse was the fact that it got leaked. We all got to see it, which you don't normally get to see.
Right.
Like the inner parts of a team practice. Usually that stuff is relatively
Locked
closed off.
down.
Yeah, exactly. So you only really see things after they're kind of done and they're just kind of just wrapping stuff up. But we
Hmm.
actually saw it. And from that point on, it was kind of rough, right? He didn't get a suspension, because they wanted him there for ring night. Um, and then after that, they were just very up and down, right? They had long stretches, where they looked okay, and then other stretches where they were terrible, especially on the road, right?
Yes.
At home they were awesome, one of the best teams, but on the road they were one of the worst teams. Um, and I think we kind of did learn, right, that like just because a team, has built up a benefit of the doubt because they've been so successful, that doesn't necessarily mean that it always is going to carry over.
Sure.
They were a team that I thought had the potential, and they were my pick initially to come out of the Western Conference, just because I still believed in the talent, and I was just kind of surprised that it felt kind of weird that there was like such a drop off from the previous season.
Right.
Uh, but regardless, we know what happened, right? Obviously, they got to the second round after beating the Kings, and then lost to the Lakers, and then made a big change, right? They sent out Jordan Poole and brought in Chris Paul, which was a move that was kind of potentially rumored because I think we had talked about it. I think both of us at the time, when it was first suggested as a possibility, didn't really care for it. Just because I don't think we were ready to give up on Jordan Poole, even though we knew that there was always the possibility for him to get moved.
Right.
Just we know he was a big part of the team that won the title, and sometimes that happens with young guys where they just have like just kind of blip-ish seasons where like just they kind of take a step back. Um, but it was also very clear that they just kind of felt like some of that stuff may have just been unsalvageable,
Sure.
and I think there's some financial aspects there as well with the new CBA.
Yeah.
And keeping him there on a long-term max deal would have really hurt them down the line. So, um, I guess kind of getting into that starting five, it's kind of weird because since he's been traded and he's been interviewed and talked to, you almost get the vibe that Chris Paul is kind of looking to be a starter.
I
Um,
know. Right.
yeah, which is kind of interesting, and obviously he's been a starter. He's basically his whole no, not basically. He has
His
been
whole
a
career.
starter
Yeah.
his entire career. Um, and it feels kind of like the Westbrook situation, I guess, where he was, where he ended up coming off the bench, but, clearly didn't really want to come off the bench.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing. I'm not really sure, what they're going to do with that, right? Because obviously, if the starting five, if he doesn't start, it's still the same one as always, right? Steph, Clay, Wiggins, Draymond, and Looney.
Yes.
But there is potential, for him to start, and then you have like Draymond at center, and then Looney comes off the bench. I don't know. Like I said, I'm okay with the start. I think the starting five is still very good. And I don't mind Chris Paul coming off the bench, but personally, I don't really like the idea of him starting just because I just think become really small. You're really
Okay.
old and slow. I understand, obviously, like, closing with him, and obviously him running the second unit, but I don't know. Like, like my feelings on it kind of depend largely on whether or not like he starts or not. Because if he comes off the bench, I don't really have too many problems with it. Obviously, it'll change their second unit because he plays at a much slower pace. They
Mm-hmm.
can pick and roll a lot more. But if he starts, I don't know. That's kind of freaky to me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm kind of on a different lane than you on this one, honestly. Like, I don't really have an issue with him starting. Now that I've kind of been able to think about it and let it simmer a little bit, I don't have a problem with him starting because I feel like they can do some real damage if they can, figure out a pick and roll with him and Draymond even. And I'm curious to see how this is going to mesh in terms of chemistry, because people forget that Chris Paul and the Warriors have had beef in the past, and
Right.
he it seems like
Yeah,
he's
Draymond himself
yeah,
mentioned that he didn't like Chris Paul.
Exactly. And I think Steve Kerr is not, a huge fan at times. I think, he's even had beef with Curry. It seems like they have everybody
Yeah,
on the squad, from the OG Warriors has beef with Chris Paul. So I'm curious to see how it works. And I think Draymond came out and said, like, he's not going to change his sentiments on anybody or his views on anybody. So that's going to be really interesting. I think they'll butt heads, but I think they'll also figure it out because arguably, they're two of, some of the better basketball minds
right.
in the NBA currently right now. They can do a lot of damage, I think, especially in that pick and roll. I'm curious to see Steph, he's a off the ball mastermind. So him playing off the ball isn't an issue. My main concern with it would be the size, like you said. You're going extremely small. I'm not too concerned with the age. I think they'll find a way to limit that. I know he'll get targeted for sure, but nowadays with drop coverage, I think Draymond is one of the best drop defenders in the league. So if they can continue to play that, then I don't think they'll have an issue with him. But if they do if they call out ISOs on Chris Paul, in terms of other teams, then you might be in a sticky situation. But that kind of goes back to what we were saying on the last podcast. Offense does do a lot for you in this modern NBA era. So, if Chris Paul is getting targeted and, he may be getting scored on like crazy, it'll be up to Curry, Clay, or somebody else, Wiggins to, I think, increase the offensive volume for their squad. But in general, I think this is a good move. And it all comes down to the money. Like you said, I think this is more of a monetary and chemistry thing because you could just tell that it wasn't going to work if Jordan Poole stuck around, and Draymond were on the same team. Because, even now, like we're getting more and more leaked angles of stuff that we didn't necessarily have during the season. In terms of player interactions, I think there was one where Jordan Poole turned the ball over, walked over to the bench, and then Draymond, tried to be a good teammate and, high five him and tell him, get your head straight. You'll just get it back on the next possession. And this is during a timeout. But then Jordan Poole grabs his hand as he's trying to dap him and, shoves it away. But then Curry's walking behind him and he's telling him, like that doesn't help. We're trying to win here. You need to set aside the personal stuff. So you could just tell it wasn't going to work. So in terms of, them moving on from Jordan Poole, I think that was inevitable and that was something that was written in the stars. But I feel like they could have gotten better for Chris Paul, or better, than Chris Paul is what I meant. But nonetheless, I think, Chris Paul is going to help them in some way, shape, or form, whether it be, using his mind or, because he's a great manipulator. That's what people don't understand about Chris
Yeah.
Paul. He can manipulate the floor, manipulate the defense as well. And he can do a lot because it seems like whenever he's in like the pick and roll, he knows the read. He's not going to make the bad read. And if he does, then, it's just a fluke pretty much. He
Yeah.
knows whether to kick it out. He knows whether to pop the midi, the three, kick it to the corner even, the roll man, whatever the case may be. He's going to get the job done. But it all comes down to, does he have enough gas left in the tank to be able to go and contend for championships, on a long-term thing with the Warriors. So
Yeah.
that's the question, I think. But
Yeah. And that's
overall,
kind of
I don't really hate it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm looking at, in terms of the strengths of the roster. Obviously, we
Hmm.
know, with Stephen Clay, the shooting. We know like the IQ of the team. I think definitely has gone up. Like
Yes.
you mentioned with Chris Paul. You still have you know on the wings, right, some level of athleticism. With Wiggins. With Moody. You're kind of also banking on, I think, some of the other young guys, to progress a little bit more.
Hmm.
I know there was a story about, apparently Wiseman, not Wiseman, Kaminga
Yes.
and Draymond, are kind of, I guess, sort of at odds in a way. I
Yeah.
think, um, for whatever reason. But yeah, you're kind of banking on those guys. I guess the other strength that I would be looking at, and this is kind of tying into the Chris Paul thing, is I think you have a little bit more flexibility. Because for me, I just don't think he's going to finish the season in Golden State. And even if he does, I feel like they're just going to trade him in the offseason.
Okay.
Because I remember when they got D'Angelo Russell,
Yeah.
I believe after Durant left, it was in that sign and trade. And
Hmm.
as soon as he was signed, right, like there were all these reports that were saying, like, yeah, he's going to be traded at the trade deadline, even though the GM was like, no, 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 we're going to have him as a long term piece. And then he
Right.
was traded for Wiggins. So that's kind of also more so what I'm looking at, as well as are you going to be able to get something for him,
Hmm.
which is possible because I mean clearly they gave up something to get him.
If he plays well,
So
I think it's very possible too.
yeah, if he plays well, and again, like there'd be a lot for him on the line as well, right? Because he needs to show that he can, be kind of like a good soldier in this environment, right? Clearly, Phoenix let him go, and obviously, like Bradley Beal's a talent upgrade,
Sure.
for sure, but right, but Chris Paul, kind of helped, like build up that Phoenix roster in a way, sort of.
Absolutely.
You know, in the past, it seems like he's had some problems, kind of sticking around with some of these teams. And like you mentioned, it seems like some of the guys on the roster have had issues in the past with him. Obviously, we've seen other, players on other teams, kind of patch up whatever issues
Hmm.
had in order to win. Which, again, that's kind of just what happens when you're a
That's their
professional.
end game. They
Yeah,
want to
exactly.
win. You know,
Yeah,
they don't
exactly.
care about getting. I mean, well, majority of them do care about getting paid, but at the end of the day, they're all rich. You know,
Yeah, like
so
yeah, you're gonna put it aside to win. Like that's just
right.
what being a professional is. But like I said, for me, I'm kind of also just looking at it from the flexibility angle. We
I
like
got you.
I mentioned we know the weaknesses, right? Obviously the size. Like I said, the chemistry. I do kind of wonder. Like you said, their basketball mind should be fine. Age mainly is more of a concern, I think, just injury wise, because a lot of those
I
guys
agree.
we know are gonna miss time, and Jordan Poole played like I think all 82 games last year in the regular season. So there's going to be games where the veteran guys are going to have to sit out. And who's the guy that kind of like steps up while they're out during the regular season? Of course, I don't know. So that would kind of be my question. Um, so I guess kind of like to look at some of the other guys on the roster.
Hmm.
They did sign Dario Saric. I think that's fine.
Yep.
They clearly like having those type of bigs that can play the center spot. More so just as like a floor spacer. Right? They tried
Right.
that with Michael Green, didn't really work out. Um, like I said, I've never been a huge fan of JaMychal Green, not
Me
as a
neither. I
person,
think his shot is
just
broken.
yeah, yeah, just as a player. Um, and then obviously they drafted Brandon Podziemski, right? He's a rookie, so he probably won't play a whole lot, right? But he kind of flashed, had some moments in the summer league, right? Had some rough moments, but then also showed some other flashes, which is again kind of what you expect
Right.
with a rookie, anyways, right? Like you don't expect a rookie to come in and play like 20 something minutes a game for a team
Especially
that.
where he was picked too.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. He was picked, I think, what 19th or
Yeah,
something
he
like
was
that.
outside the lottery. So
Right. So you don't expect a guy outside of the lottery to help, and play 20 plus minutes a game for a team that is still trying to contend for a title, right?
right.
Like, even though I don't think they will, they're still clearly trying to contend, right? Otherwise, they would have, they wouldn't
Blown
have
it
all.
up.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, as long as you have Steph on the roster, you should attempt to compete, for championships, and that was kind of one of the mistakes that probably was ended up that you might as well say like yeah they probably messed it up is banking on those young guys turning out to be studs and they're okay, they're fine, right? But apparently at different points it seemed like they had options to trade those veteran guys for another star. I think even though I don't think it would have happened, right? I think when Durant first asked out from Brooklyn, right? I think there was, some reports about the idea of Golden State maybe thinking about, hey, maybe we might want to trade, our young guys for Durant. Or it doesn't even have to be him, right? They mention other names like Damian Lillard or, like a Bradley Beal or something
Hmm.
like that. And apparently the veteran guys going into the year they won the title, they wanted the front office to make, a move like that. They wanted them to
Right.
trade guys and they didn't. And, they ended up winning a title, right? But it probably cost them last season and maybe this season because now, again, you're banking on some young guys getting better because your star guys are getting older.
Right.
Um, and that's kind of the thing is you have to bank on your stars anyways because again, once Steph Curry is no longer Steph, that's it.
It's
It
done.
doesn't. Yeah, it's
Rebuild
done.
time.
Exactly. So like the two timeline thing, I understand it. Some of it is kind of hindsight 2020 because people were very high on most of their young guys, right? But just it's very hard to do. To have a core of guys that are your stars that have carried your franchise for basically a decade, and then you are trying to have guys waiting in the wings, to kind of lead the next decade, which it just doesn't normally work out. So,
Right.
um, like I said, they also signed what Corey Joseph, again probably third string point guard.
Hmm.
We know they also I think they nabbed Trace Jackson Davis, right? That's our
Yes.
guy. Um, and then they also, obviously at the deadline last year they traded for Gary Payton, so he's back, so he should help out. Um, so again, we don't do betting here. Obviously, we're not gambling
Yeah.
people. But in terms of the over under, they have the Warriors at like 48.5.
Okay.
So they're basically projecting them to win basically almost 50 games, which, if you look at like the standings, that's third in the Western Conference. Um, so I
That's a
guess
little
like
high.
Houston, yeah, I feel like that's a little bit high,
Yeah.
because like the Nuggets are projected at 53.5, right? So
Yeah.
like, I don't know if they're like only 5 games apart from Denver. I mean,
No.
I could be wrong, but I feel like they're probably going to be a little bit lower. But I think again, people are banking on, the Jordan Poole thing. Because that fizzled out, it'll work better with Chris Paul.
I think it
Again,
will, but I don't know if that's going to result in them winning more games. I think it'll result in them potentially being better in the postseason.
yeah, I think yeah, because that's kind of how you have to look at it. Is can you get 16 good games out of Chris Paul? Because that's how many games in the playoffs you need.
Yeah.
That's how many games you need to win in the playoffs. To win the championship. The issue
Right.
for him is he has not had a healthy postseason, and I
Ages.
can't even remember.
It's been ages.
It's been a long time because even like a couple of those Phoenix seasons, like where because I know like the 64 win season, I don't think he missed games, but there were reports of him having some type of injury that he
He
was
was
playing.
hurt.
Yeah, exactly, and he was definitely hurt the year before as well,
He
and
was hurt
obviously
in
we
Houston.
last season exactly hurt in Houston, hurt in LA, so that's kind of been the issue for him, and again, that's probably not going to get any better because he's going to be 39,
Right.
um, going next season basically. So I mean, that's kind of how you have to look at it, right? Can you have a 39-year-old point guard, be a major guy in your rotation and win you a title? Obviously, he's better than most 39-year-old point guards. I don't think there's any other 39 point guards in the 39-year-old point guards
No.
in the NBA right now, anyway. So, it is going to be interesting to see. But yeah, so like I guess in terms of like I think we both feel like they're probably better than they were last year.
Yes, they are better,
Yeah, I feel like they are,
but how
but I
much though?
guess I don't. Yeah, but I don't feel like it's by much, and I just don't feel like they made the moves that I think they needed to make to win. To be better, like much better, like in terms of winning a title. I think that they needed to. I don't know. I don't feel like Chris Paul is like the antidote,
Okay.
for their problems, but I do think that they probably got better. I guess like the question for me is like if you swap Chris Paul with Jordan Poole last
hmm
year, really change the Lakers Warriors series because I don't feel like it does.
It
I mean,
doesn't.
maybe
Well,
it gets to a seven.
maybe it does, chemistry wise, maybe because like I said, I feel like that punch was like the beginning of the end for them. But like in terms of Chris Paul, if we look at his career, I feel like everywhere that he's gone, he's made it work in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
Even the
more
OKC
malleable.
days, he made it
Yeah,
work.
he's a more malleable player than you think, and he's had some experience playing alongside other, types of other guards that like to
Right.
handle the ball. Right, played with Shea and Dennis Schroeder in Oklahoma City. Played with Harden. One of the most extreme examples of that in Houston.
Ball
So he's
dominant.
definitely so like yeah, exactly. So like I don't really have like as many concerns that he'll figure it out. I just don't think it'll be good enough for them to win the title, and that's their goal, right? Their goal
Yeah.
isn't to just make it to the second round like last year. Their goal is to be back in that championship mix because
Chris
that's the
Paul is
issue,
not
right?
the answer for a title.
Right.
That
And
simple
the
as
thing
that.
is, like, yeah, and like the theme, as we get into these other Western Conference teams, a lot of teams in the Western Conference, I think you can make the argument have gotten better. Um, just aside from I guess Denver, but like at the same time, even with Denver, like, did they get worse enough where they're not going to be a championship team next year? No, they're still going to be
Right.
in the mix, right? They'll be able to cobble, minutes together, to replace Bruce Brown and Jeff Green, I'm sure.
hmm
Because you still have Jokic and Jamal Murray. Your championship core is intact, right? You're just kind of trying to, you know,
And then
fill the
you hope
roster
that
and
Michael
around that.
Porter Jr. steps up a little bit too.
Right,
So,
exactly. Exactly. And that's the thing, because some of those guys are still relatively young. So one of those guys may have a chance to, take another level
right.
forward. You just never know. Because, then sometimes, with a team that won a title, then some guys have a little bit more of a sense of entitlement, no pun intended. And then
Right.
and then they start, playing in ways that they probably shouldn't be playing. So I
Sure.
guess, kind of like what we did with Phoenix.
hmm
Where do you see this Warriors team, kind of finishing
Okay.
at the end of the season? Like, so let's say, the regular season's done, we're in the playoffs, right? What do you see them doing?
Well, I'll say this, at the end of the regular season, I'd see them probably finishing around 5 or 6. I don't see them being a top 3 seed. Not with this roster. I think they need a little bit more support around, Curry and Clay. We know that they can be a good team, but they can be a
Right.
even better team if they had a little bit more help, I think for sure. And in terms of playoffs, I'm probably conference finals. I think that's probably
Okay.
where they would flame out. I think that's their limit because I don't see them getting past certain squads. And really, I know we're talking about it so prematurely because we haven't seen them play, but you can just
Sure.
kind of see it, because like you said, how much better are they, you know, with a Jordan Poole Chris Paul swap? Is it a difference maker in terms of some aspects? Yes,
Right.
but in terms of what we're talking about, championship aspirations, no shot. I think it's a long shot because you need more than just Chris Paul. You needed to acquire somebody else,
Yeah.
specifically in that second unit, I think. But
Right.
um,
The way that
I don't know.
yeah.
It's not enough. I think they'll probably
Right.
flame
'Cause
out in the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, because the way that I look at it is, I guess because you have Steph, and you do have a championship core, you still have the ability to get to the conference finals.
Hmm.
I just think in order for me to really believe, I need to see them move Chris Paul and bring in some other stuff. That's kind of what like
Fair.
that. That's kind of what would make me raise their ceiling a little bit more. And again, the difficulty is you're gonna have to go through, a number of teams in order to get to the
Exactly.
finals, right? And you're probably gonna have to go through two out of those other teams that we mentioned, right? You're probably going to have to go out of 2 out of 3 against like, Phoenix, Denver, LA. You're going to have to beat probably at least two of those three teams, in order to get there, right? You may
Right.
be able to avoid one of them, but, to beat all of them,
Like
when
let's
I think,
let's let's take a look at all the squads in the West. Sorry, I didn't
right.
mean to cut you off, but like,
Yeah.
let's take a look at them. I don't think they beat Denver.
Okay.
Memphis is arguable. It depends on how Memphis plays and what they look like
I
and
think
how
they could beat Memphis.
yeah, like it's arguable, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt because I think Curry, Clay, Draymond, and then the other pieces that they have. I think that's a more mature and championship and a better team in general. Sacramento, I think they beat as well. Phoenix, I don't think they beat. The Clippers, it depends on who's on the roster, but a current healthy roster of the Clippers, I don't think they win. Lakers, now that's an interesting one. Um, I'm gonna go on a limb and say they probably lose to the Lakers as well. I think they beat Minnesota though. I think they beat OKC, New Orleans, probably they beat Dallas. Most of these teams they can beat, but there's about 4 or 5 other teams that will give them some trouble, and that's why I kind of have them finishing, around that 5, 6, maybe even 4 range, but not top 3.
Yeah.
And they definitely won't get to beyond the conference finals. I don't think. Not with this
Yeah.
roster. It's just not doable. I don't think.
Yeah. Because again, that's the thing is, I think you just have to look at the teams around them, because again, like, if you look at the standings from last year, right, they were six,
Hmm.
aside from the Lakers, they could beat any of the teams that were below them. I think they could beat the Clippers,
Okay.
and I think they could beat Memphis for sure. Um, Denver, I don't know, because like it's kind of
I
interesting
don't think so.
because like you almost feel like with Golden State because of Steph, like they may have an opportunity, to kind of like take advantage of, okay, Jokic is gonna have to be out on the perimeter,
Sure.
and he might have to switch. And unlike Phoenix, it's not from mid range, it's from three. But then
Hmm.
at the same time, then you also have to factor in, okay, well, what's Golden State gonna do with Denver's size, right? Because it's not like Denver is like a big, like oafish team, right? They're a big team with a decent amount of athleticism and a decent amount of skill.
Right.
Like that's a team, that in general is pretty tough, especially like as the series goes on and guys get tired. Because you saw like they were very, fatigued at the end of that Lakers series,
Hmm.
right? And like the Lakers were just, bigger than them. And they had some skill as well, right? Not as much as Denver, right? But like they had, a size advantage against Golden State and a physicality advantage that like just over
Absolutely.
time, like they just kind of wore down. And it does feel like a lot of these teams are kind of just sizing up in general. Um, and that's going to be the difficulty for Golden State is just again like we know that they're the best small ball team ever, basically. But again, it's like now you're playing against some teams that are going to be intriguing matchups, right? Because like at their peak, they weren't
Athletes,
really
man.
playing. Yeah, because they weren't at their peak. They weren't really playing against teams like Denver or LA.
No.
Like because like some of the teams that they played against in in the at their peak, like the
Houston.
Spurs, that was a slower team, right? Like
Right.
Houston was a yeah, they were like Houston was a slower paced team. And they were very close to beating Golden State. Chris Paul got hurt, but
Yeah.
still, it's just that's kind of how you have to look at it, right? Like the big teams that they played against were either like really slow or they couldn't shoot at all, right? Like the Oklahoma City team that they played against in 2016, very good athletically, a ton of size, but they couldn't shoot, right?
Yeah.
Like in
It was
that
only
starting
KD
five,
pretty much.
it was like West, yeah, and even he didn't like shoot that
Lights
great,
out.
but like
Yeah.
again, like Westbrook, Robertson, Steven Adams, right? Those three are already guys that don't space the floor at all.
Right.
Right, and then Ibaka, I guess is essentially your second best shooter,
Yeah, which
other
is
than
not great.
yeah. So, whereas now, right, like it's a completely different type of squad with that Denver team, right? Like in that starting five, basically everybody can consistently hit a jump shot. Aaron Gordon is kind of hit or miss, but
Mm-hmm.
he can make up for that just because of how athletic he is. So
Exactly.
that's kind of the difficulty there is just you're playing against bigger and more skilled, teams that you weren't necessarily playing as much. And again, like just they're also older now, right? Like they're still gonna be really good. I just don't know if they're gonna be able to get out of the Western Conference. Not without some luck. Now, in
Right.
fairness, you do need to win a championship anyways, but some teams I think will need a little bit more to go their way than others,
I
right? Because
agree.
I just think with State, I think you need a little bit more favorable of a map. And I think you're also just gonna have to like also bank on those young guys being like real key
Pieces.
players in your yeah, real pieces, right? Like not just guys that can help you in the regular season, right? But also guys that can help you come playoff time, right? Because Kaminga had stretches in the regular season where he played very well. Um, but in the playoffs, he didn't really do anything, right? Like, he barely even played.
But I think that's a
From
testament to the coaching style. You know what I mean? It seems like
yeah,
Steve Kerr doesn't have an immense trust in, a lot of the young guys that he tends to pick up. I feel
yeah,
like even with Jordan Poole, you kind of saw it regress. They would take him out at
right.
certain points.
Yeah, exactly.
And then a lot of those were rightful times to take him out because, defensive liability at times. And if he's not hitting shots, he's not really doing anything for you because if he's not hitting shots, then he's most likely turning the ball over and also not really doing anything on defense.
Right.
So I
Yeah,
get that.
exactly.
But at the same time, not putting in Kaminga, veering away from Moses Moody, it's just interesting coaching choices. And then the whole Wiseman debacle, that seemed like an entirely failed project, by Kerr and the entire Golden State management. So, they don't have a great track record in terms of developing young rookies to their full potential and even really playing them at certain points when they should be.
Right. No, I get it because it is interesting, in terms of the taking Jordan Poole out. Because say like Klay Thompson, might have a game where he was like, I think in one of those games he was like 3 for 19
Right.
or some number, right? But if he's not going to get pulled, late in the game just because again he's one of their guys, he's
It's
part of
Clay
that core.
Thompson.
Exactly. Yeah. Because even if he's not at a point where he's the same guy, like he's still because he's earned all that trust and like he's got so much respect like within that team. Like they're never gonna take him out of a game late
Right.
if he's even if he's playing poorly, right? Whereas with Jordan Poole, he's gonna have a much shorter leash just because he doesn't have the same, resume, up to this point, right? And again, like he was a big part of their title team, but even the year they won the title, his minutes started to go down a little bit, as the playoffs, went further and further, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the time Boston series rolled around, he was playing like 20 minutes a game. Still
Yeah.
had some big games for them, right? But it wasn't to the same effect as, the earlier part of the playoffs where he was playing, like a third star basically.
Right. I
So,
don't know.
you know, I,
It's just
yeah,
interesting
like
coaching.
yeah, exactly. Like so I guess to kind of wrap up the Warriors thing, like a lot of it is kind of like how much stock do you put into Jordan Poole and Draymond,
Sure.
really, mucking up, what happened last year. I don't feel like that was the only reason why they didn't, why it didn't work out.
Sure.
But, like that's part of it, right? Like it's kind of like how much stock do you put into that? How much stock do you put into Chris Paul really helping this team? Whether or not it's on the court or as a trade chip. Um, and do they have another title run left in them? Like I feel like they probably do, just
Mm-hmm.
because Steph is still a superstar and you still have a decent supporting cast. I just feel like, it could potentially be like, one or two, one more season or so of this, kind of, I don't know, sort of last dancey. Not that the guys are going to be gone, right? Because Draymond signed an extension. Steph had his extension like a year or two ago, and Clay presumably is going to sign an extension as well. But just in terms of like last dance, it's like winning championships. I
I
just feel
get
like
you.
they don't have much more than like a year or so left, anyways, just because of the age of those guys. And I feel like those guys are, the core of the team. And once those guys kind of age out, that's probably it.
I get you. Like for me, it's very similar to you. Um, Steph Curry, as long as he's around, I feel like the championship door is always open. As long as he's playing
Right.
at pretty good performance, you'll be fine. Um, in terms of your championship odds or whatever the case may be. But I think a huge factor for them playing so bad this season was they couldn't figure out that road thing at all. Like they couldn't win on the road. You had multiple
Right.
players, when they were asked about it, they said, I don't know. So it's like if you don't know the answer to the question as to why you're losing on the road, then that's something they
Right.
need to iron out before the start of this upcoming
Yeah.
season. So I think
'Cause
if they have a better, what'd you say?
it's not going to get any easier.
Right. So if they have a better, road performance run, in this upcoming season, then I'll feel a little bit better about them and they may even rise to top 3 for me. But, just going off of what I saw last season, I'm going to take into account that they haven't figured out the road thing yet. Um, so that's kind of where I stand on it. But, and also the Jordan Poole, Draymond beef, I think that was a huge factor because it really messed up their chemistry and it definitely spread to other guys because then you got to keep in mind with beefs, people pick sides. So it seemed
Yeah.
like a lot of the like from what I remember,
All the
um,
vets picked.
yeah, nobody
I
really sided with Poole except for the
I think
organization
Wiggins.
PR.
Yeah.
Like, but the
I think
vets like Curry, Clay. I mean,
right.
you didn't hear anybody really say, Draymond was wrong. He needs to apologize, whatever.
Right.
And we don't
Yeah,
know
because
what was
even
said.
because even the guys that reportedly, sided, like, kind of like sided with Poole in a way, like those guys never really like, said a whole lot about it, like you said.
Right,
Like I think reportedly, I think it was like Wiggins and maybe Looney, right, who
right,
were kind of in Jordan Poole's corner, right? But obviously Wiggins was preoccupied, with other stuff because he was out for a good chunk of the season. But
right.
still, like you said, you just never really heard a lot, anybody really like come to Poole's corner. But some of that also may have just been, reportedly, it had built up over time. Reportedly, he was, kind of going around, I guess, like parading the fact that he was getting a lot of money. But like,
Yes,
I don't know enough about like, everything that was said. Draymond on Patrick Beverly's podcast reportedly he was like, there are some things, that guys just don't say to each other. But
right.
like, I still don't know what that is. So,
I think it's
it's
something along the lines of that money thing. Um,
yeah,
so I think that's the best place to kind of like leave that. But in terms of the Warriors, overall, I think they'll have a good season.
yeah,
I think it'll be better than last season for sure. But just because it's better doesn't mean they're gonna win the title. Um, so like I said, I think their limit is definitely the Western Conference Finals, which isn't a bad thing, but at the same time, it kind of is. Even if you do have Curry, like you should be contending every year, but they'll definitely be in the playoffs as long as these guys are healthy.
right,
And I think the Chris Paul addition does help. I think that's like the general scope that I'm looking at.
yeah. I guess, kind of, I guess to finally actually wrap it up.
hmm
Do you think that Chris Paul finishes the season for Golden State?
Hmm. I think he does.
Okay.
Um, and the reason why is because it seems like everybody wants him. Everybody wants him
Okay.
there. There's not like a lot of pushback on it. There's not a lot of negativity. Um, obviously they have to address the negativity due to the past beefs and whatnot, but I think he'll finish the season mainly due to the fact that, I mean, they said like Steve Kerr wants him there. They wouldn't have made the move unless they really wanted him, I think. It was mainly due to the fact that they needed to get rid of Jordan Poole ASAP, but at the same time, you can't really, I'm sure there were other offers, and I think they just took Chris Paul because they know he has a winning mentality. He's one of the best basketball minds, in the current NBA right now. So, I mean, I don't think it's a loss, bringing him on. And,
Sure.
they have the entire summer to iron out the details, squash the beef, put it aside, just in the name of winning championships in the NBA, So that's kind of the way that I'm looking at it. What about you? You don't think he will?
Yeah, I'm kind of skeptical that he
Okay,
finishes the season in Golden State. I mean,
fair.
I guess in fairness, he does have a 2-year deal. The second year, I think, is completely non-guaranteed. The last year of his deal, I think, is completely non-guaranteed.
Oh, wow.
So I'm just kind of looking at it from the perspective of like, if they find somebody that they think like, hey, this guy can help us, like, do, something special. They'll be able to move him because again, like, if you move him and another team takes him on, they don't really have to do anything with him, after this season. Um, So that's just kind of how I look at it.
Okay.
It's not so much, like whether or not he helps them win. It's
Sure.
more so like, are we going to see some guys available, as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline? Because
Yeah.
it is kind of interesting, because, at the draft, it was kind of expected that there was going to be a lot more movement,
Mm-hmm.
on draft night, and there really wasn't. There were
Right.
like a few players, that got moved around, but not really, too many guys.
Not crazy.
Obviously, Golden State and Boston made their big moves leading up to the draft. But we didn't really see a whole lot of that. So I do kind of wonder, what are there going to be like big moves that teams make, going into the season? Because again, now we're in the new era with the new CBA, and there's going to be some tougher flexibility if you're taking on like big long term deals. So I do kind of wonder, but I don't know. I'm not going to completely rule it out, that he finishes the season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think he'll finish. I don't think he'll like his. I don't think his contract will like end with Golden State
Oh,
at the
okay.
very
Yeah.
least.
Then yeah,
But
I agree.
at the same time, I don't know. I'm just kind of skeptical that he finishes the season
That's
in
fair
Golden
though.
State. But
We've
yeah,
seen
but
it before.
some yeah, exactly. Because again with D'Angelo Russell, right? He was moved. Literally, I think the day of the trade deadline.
Right.
For Andrew Wiggins, and again, everybody saw it coming because it was reported like that. It was
Right.
reported that they basically got him. And he signed there with the understanding that yeah, we're gonna trade you at some point. And he did end up getting traded to Minnesota to play with his buddy Towns, right? But obviously Chris Paul's in a different situation, right? Because he's
Sure.
older, and he probably ideally would only like to go to a handful of teams. You know what I
Right. He
mean?
wants
Like
to
I,
win.
this, yeah, exactly. At this point, like I'm sure he'd rather be in Golden State than be in Washington. You know?
Yeah, I agree.
And
Chris Paul probably
yeah,
doesn't want to go through the whole OKC thing again.
yeah,
I don't blame him.
exactly. And it's right, exactly. It's not a dig at Washington. It's just like, like Golden State does have a chance to win, even though
Right.
I don't think us think they will. They have a chance, right? Like
Right. It's
you're
there.
not going to pull them out. Yeah, exactly, because they have a top five player with a good roster.
Hmm. I
Yeah,
agree.
and that's kind of what were we saying?
I said I agree.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I guess we'll wrap up the Golden State thing, in terms of their roster. So I guess like do we want to give grades out or like do we just or do we think we kind of did enough like in terms of saying what we think their ceiling is going to be?
I mean, we can give out a grade. It just depends on what the criteria is going to be.
Yeah,
Are we
I mean I
speaking
guess
on like their off season or the
yeah
last
like
season? What are we talking about?
yeah let's just do like for this off season in
Okay,
terms of like what they put together this roster. What grade are you going to give
I give them a solid B plus.
them? Okay.
I can't give them an A, just because I don't think it was enough personally. But the pieces that they got rid of and brought back were pretty good in my opinion. I think bringing
Okay.
on Chris Paul was great. Saric, like you said, great. And then getting rid of Jordan Poole is also a solid move for them. From their perspective. So I can't really argue with it, but I can't give it an
Yeah.
A because I don't think it's enough to put them over the hump that they need to be to win the
Right.
finals.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably just lean more towards like B
Okay.
minus.
Okay.
I like again, like you said, they did probably need to get Jordan Poole out of there. Again for Chris Paul, kind of neutral about it. But like I said, like that's kind of how I feel about it. Like I'm basically kind of like almost net neutral on it,
I
where
got
it's
you.
like I definitely don't think they got. I don't feel like they got worse, but I also don't really feel like they got that much better.
Okay.
But I wouldn't give them like a C because I do think like they did make some decent moves. And again, the flexibility is hard anyways because they have so many. They have so much money on the roster,
Right.
so there's not a
Oh,
whole lot they can really do. Period wise.
right.
Um,
One
but in
factor
terms,
I forgot to
yeah.
mention, sorry, this might factor into your grade as well. Bringing back Draymond Green was definitely a positive as well.
Oh yeah, that too.
Re-signing
Yeah,
him on a pay
yeah.
cut. So,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Which is even better if you're Golden State because you save some money and you're not like you know you're not getting punched in the gut quite as
right.
much.
They're not bleeding.
Um, yeah, so that's kind of how I look at it, right? Because like I wouldn't have expected them to do much more just because I know with the salaries they can't really do a whole lot. So it's
Right.
like unless the only thing they can really do to shake up the roster would have been they would have had to have traded one of their big contract guys, and that's what they did.
Right.
So, that's kind of how I look at it. Like, because like you said, I don't think it was bad enough to give it like a C, right,
Right.
or lower. But like you said, I also don't think it was good enough to give them an A, right?
Right.
Like if they had made some type of home run move, it would have easily been an A.
Sure.
Um, for sure. But like you said, I'm kind of in that like B minus range. So we're kind of in a similar a
Yeah.
similar thought process, I think.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess now we're gonna kind of get into some some rumors. Not again similar to last time. Not really much has changed around the league, right? Still no Harden trade. Still no Lillard trade.
And we'll keep you updated.
Report-
Trust me, that'll be at the beginning of an episode. If something breaks.
right, exactly, and still reportedly Harden basically is solely focused on the Clippers. According to the Athletic. And so it like I get it because again, like at the end of the day, I still think a lot of it has to do with him, you know, thinking about opting out and probably not getting great signs in terms of like, hey, there's not a whole lot of teams that are willing to give you what you thought because we thought it might be Houston, even though I always thought that move
Yeah.
didn't really make
We
any
thought it was
sense.
baloney
Yeah, exactly. And they
for the
ended up,
longest.
exactly. And they ended up, giving that money, I guess, to Dylan Brooks, Fred Van Vliet, and I guess Jock Landale, which I guess, is sort of better, but I mean,
3 is better than 1.
yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, so
Not
yeah,
really though.
yeah, so I mean that's kind of how I look at it. So it's like, it makes sense, and then it's the same thing, right? Where it's the same thing as the Lillard situation, right? Where
Yeah.
the both of the guys, want one specific team.
Right.
We know this, and then the other teams know this as well, right? But then at the same time, the other team that's trying to get them is clearly not putting out like the best offer that they
Right,
could,
because
right?
they don't want to destroy, whatever they've built
Right.
built so far. It's funny to
Exactly.
me.
Like, yeah,
It's
like if
hard.
I'm the Clippers, yeah, if I'm the Clippers and I'm trying to get Harden, I don't really want to give up Paul George to get Harden.
No,
Um, and if I'm
no.
Miami, I mean, all they really have is Hero in terms of
Right.
like giving up
Everyone else
guys,
is
right? Like,
off limits.
yeah, you're not giving up Jimmy Butler or Bam to
No,
get Damian Lillard.
nope.
That's
You
out of
don't
the
have
question.
Gabe Vincent anymore. You don't have Struce
Like,
to give up anymore. So you're stuck with Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, and some picks. Simple as that.
yeah, and maybe Lowry, if you want to send
Maybe.
him out to like a third team, I don't know, but
Who wants
yeah,
Lowry though?
yeah. I mean, as an expiring contract, somebody might take him. Um, but it's more so just from the perspective of it's the same situation that we were in before, where say if Miami wants Lillard, they're gonna have to have some additional teams help them out.
Sure.
And they're gonna have to give a better offer than what they're giving out. And same thing for the Clippers. If they want to get Harden, obviously Philly wants, a good return for Harden, which is understandable because he's still very good.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if they're gonna get it. Reportedly also according to Jake Fisher, like Harden's not gonna hold out. If it gets to training camp and he's still there, he's gonna go. Which again, it's probably best for him to play. Like I mentioned with Chris Paul and a couple of other guys, it's probably best for him to play good soldier because again we've seen in the past what happens when he's unhappy and kind of really wanting to get out of his situation that he's in,
Yes.
where he's not really playing hard, and all that other stuff, that comes with it. And, at this point, he's no longer like in a tier of players where you're just going to give him money no matter what.
Right.
Like obviously you would have done that like 5 years ago, right? But, this version of Harden, no. So I think he kind of needs to probably be on his best behavior. Um, where because if he's not, like, I mean, somebody may sign him, but like, there's no guarantees at this point,
Right. I
So
agree.
yeah, so like, I think for him, it's probably best, if he, can be on his best behavior. I know on Instagram he posted something about like, it's time to get uncomfortable. Which I mean, I feel like we've seen him when he gets uncomfortable before, but
Yeah, and it's not the greatest.
yeah, exactly. Even like the clubs have seen him uncomfortable. So I
Yeah.
mean,
100
so
honey
I mean,
buns in a freaking strip club. Love to see it, right?
yeah, exactly. Like I was listening to another podcast the other day.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I think it was the NBA front office, and they were mentioning something about like what if Harden like has like an MVP season and goes on like a stripper fueled rampage.
Oh goodness.
So
Well,
yeah,
they better
yeah.
watch out.
All right. So yeah. So yeah. So I mean, yeah, like you said, if anything happens, obviously we'll continue to update. But for now, nothing. Jalen Brown, according to Mass Live, we keep hearing the same thing. At some point, he's gonna sign that extension. He's gonna sign that extension, but he hasn't signed it yet.
Right.
So I kind of want to know, like, when is
What's
he
the
gonna
holdup?
sign it? Yeah, what's the holdup? Reportedly, they're saying like they're trying to negotiate a trade kicker in there. So I guess if he gets traded, he gets more money. Um, but I feel like this should have already been done. Like if they were like dead set on like we're gonna re-sign him. I mean, I'm not saying that they're gonna trade him, but like
Right.
I just do kind of wonder, what's the holdup? Because already we know reportedly like AD is gonna reportedly probably sign an extension
Hmm.
once he's eligible next month. But again with Jalen Brown, like where is it?
Right. And like, that was one of the first things I think we talked about once the season was over. We were talking about guys who were gonna be expecting some big deals. And I think one of the first people that we mentioned was Jalen Brown because I think he's, eligible
And then
for yeah, and I think, it's upwards like 300 million. So, I mean, what is the real holdup? I'm curious on like, whose end it's on, and I'm gonna assume it's on Boston's. I'm sure they're just trying to figure out, the technicalities and stuff, like you said. They may even be thinking about a no trade clause. I doubt it, but
yeah.
holy, I mean, you would think, this would be one of the guys that would get, one of the first extensions, but it is what it is, but I'm hoping they can actually get it done and, that he'll have a future in Boston because I think that's, where he belongs.
Yeah, that's yeah, I'm kind of there with you as well. Like I said, I'm just kind of wondering where is it? Because
Right.
again, we continuously, heard that it's gonna happen at some point. It's gonna happen at some point, but it still hasn't. And it's
Right.
just obviously there's still plenty of time left, but it's just like you said, you kind of would have thought like as soon as he's eligible, you would have probably gotten it. Because they were saying like, yeah, it'll be done during Vegas, and it's like, well, Vegas has been over now, so. Okay, so according to the Athletic, OG Anunoby, Eric Corrine saying that Raptors not seriously listening to offers despite buzz unless he's unhappy. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, again, we've heard this before over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Dating back to the trade deadline, right, where like we thought he might be going somewhere, and then Toronto decided to flake.
Keep
And
him.
apparently, they've kind of built up a reputation as a team that sort of like dangles guys around, and then at the end of the day, they're like, "Nah, we're not going to do it." So it's like I don't know what's going on there.
Right.
Um, so I don't understand it because again, like I mean, like I guess if you're not getting back good offers, because he's a good enough player where you'd like to get back something, but at the same time, like he's not in a tier where like you should be getting back like a ton.
Right.
I mean, I feel like we've just seen the market sort of like reset on some of these trades, right? I think some of these teams have kind of realized like, yeah, maybe we gave up a little too much, to get, these guys, like
DeJounte
Minnesota,
Murray,
yeah,
Rudy
DeJounte Murray.
Gobert,
Yeah, exactly. And it's not that those guys are bad. It's just
the value
because
isn't
you,
there.
yeah, because you gave up so much. Now it hurts the flexibility of your team. Like Atlanta is kind of now at a point where like they have to make some moves because they gave up picks, so like they can't really afford to be bad. Like some of these other teams. But
Right.
then it's like some of the flexibility is not necessarily there because you don't have picks. They have a decent amount of players to move, but still like and that's kind of the weird thing with Toronto is that again, like, you could have traded potentially Fred Van Vliet at the deadline and got something back, but it's like you didn't. And
Right.
so he walked and ended up getting nothing. And that's kind of rough, I think, if you're Toronto, because you don't want to just lose good players for nothing. It's one thing like if a mediocre player, just walks and you don't get anything back for him, but like, like Fred Van Vliet is was one of like your best players. Like,
I
I
agree.
mean, yeah, I feel like you could have and should have gotten something back for him, assuming that you knew he was going to leave, which I'm
Right.
assuming they probably thought he was going to leave.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, and then according to Jake Fisher, right? So Christian Wood, his name obviously has come up again. So we've heard, some teams that apparently have some interest in him, and they mention, that the Lakers are interested, but also that the Bulls and the Heat could potentially kind of come in there, and take him. Obviously, he's a guy, that when we were talking about all the free agents, he was a guy that we had him, I think, projected sort of going to Orlando, but he was also kind of in one of those, watch out tiers because
Right.
he was a guy that Dallas, it was very clear that they were not going to bring him back, and they didn't give up a whole lot to get him. So,
Right.
unfortunately, he kind of ended up in that tier that like Dennis Schroeder was in a few years ago, where talented player didn't really work out in the situation he was in, and now he's kind of in a position where now he's going to probably have to be forced to take less than what he was probably hoping for. So
Right.
you know Each of these teams kind of brings a different, scenario there, right? Obviously with Miami, if he were to go there, he probably would have to wait to see what happens with the Lillard situation. I think Miami can really only offer him the minimum. So money isn't really a factor there. If it's money, I think Chicago can offer the most, because they have that disabled player exception, for Lonzo Ball.
Yes.
But I think if they use all of it, they're going to be in the luxury tax, and the Bulls are typically not a team that likes to, be in the luxury tax. Um, so reportedly it's between those two teams and LA, the Lakers. So I do kind of wonder, what happens with him because there's a role, for him, for any of those teams. But for him, like I don't know. I guess like if I were again, I'm not an agent, but if I were his agent, like I think you kind of like need to get him to a team where there's gonna be minutes. He's got an opportunity to play, maybe potentially start. And, if he shows that he can commit to, other things other than just score and be a more positive presence in the locker room, right? Then he'll have the potential, to get paid. We've seen, guys in Miami and LA, right? We've seen guys come in, out of nowhere and get paid, right? Like,
Right.
Max Strus, Vincent, we just saw them get paid for Miami. We know with LA, right? Malik Monk, right? He got paid a decent amount, and other guys, right? Like guys that were kind of like, maybe they might be on their way out. Even like Rondo, right? He was kind of a guy that had, some issues, elsewhere. He comes to LA, wins a title, and then I think Atlanta, gave him that, contract that he probably wouldn't have gotten.
Right. Bruce
Um,
Brown now.
so, yeah, Bruce Brown, obviously that title effect. So that's kind of the thing. So that's kind of where what I would recommend him to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I feel like, personally to me, it would either be the Heat or LA. Like the Bulls, I feel like is more so money. I guess he would play in Chicago as well. Um, but I don't know. I just feel like if he shows that he can fit in like in a locker room with some talent, like Miami or LA, I think that's gonna be his best chance. To like stick around. Obviously, like he's not gonna stick around with those teams because they're not gonna be able to give him much the following season. But it would give him an opportunity to hit free agency next year and be like, hey, I helped the team win a title, or I helped the team at least compete
Yeah,
at a high level.
I
So
agree.
of those, yeah. So what do you? Yeah, exactly. So what do you think of those?
I like all options honestly because I feel like they can all fit. And kind of to steal your words, when you were talking about Miles Bridges a couple episodes ago, it's kind of similar to like a 1 year prove it deal where he has to prove that he can do a little bit more and he can be a wholesome guy in the locker room because it seems like he's a little bit of a cancer. Not to write a narrative on him, but we're just speaking facts here. Um,
Right.
but I would be intrigued by LA. I feel like Chicago is probably the most off-putting, but I think I would like LA a lot, just because it would
Yeah.
be kind of cool to see them get like another scoring skilled big man, and hopefully being around Ham, maybe that can give him some toughness on defense. I don't know, but that's definitely the aspect of his game that needs a little bit of work is the
Yeah.
defense.
Because he's got some physical tools, even though he's kind of wiry,
Hmm.
but he does have super long arms. I think he's got like a 7'4"
You're
wingspan.
right.
Um, like you mentioned, obviously he can score. Not like it's interesting because I know Rob Palinka mentioned that he would like kind of like he likes the idea of potentially having another big man play alongside AD again. But
Hmm.
and he also mentioned the idea of like we want guys with different skill sets. They have Jackson Hayes, who's more like an interior athletic big.
Right.
So it makes sense. I mean, he would. I don't think defensively, like the issue with him is like like you could have like Jackson Hayes as the five and then AD as the four, even though like again a horrible shooting front court. Assuming that
Yeah.
AD shooting just doesn't come back.
Right.
Um, with Wood offensively he's more like a four, but then like defensively like he's more of a five. Like I don't think he can really guard
No. No.
like
No.
power
No. No.
like or wings like that. So the fit thing is kind of weird. Talent wise, it makes a lot of sense. Um,
But
but I
minutes
do kind
wise,
of
maybe not.
yeah, exactly. But it is kind of funny because I think there was also like some insider or executive guy who went around basically telling people like if LeBron can make Christian Wood fit in LA, he's the goat. And I'm like, is it that bad? Because again, like I don't know, I don't know a whole lot about Christian Wood,
Sure.
obviously, because I don't know these people personally, but it has been reported that like he's had some issues in the locker room, like not to the level of say like a Miles Bridges, like where he did something like
Off the court.
awful,
Right.
yeah, off the court, but like it seems like he's worn out his welcome. for a lot of these teams. But I just thought that quote was really
because
funny because it just seems like it kind of like kind of goes with what you mentioned, where it seems like he's got some problems that he's got to figure out. Because again, like the NBA kind of tells you what you are. When you see free agency happen, right? Because I'm
hmm
sure he expects to get more money, than what he's going to get, and he's better than a minimum contract player for sure.
absolutely.
But again, he's in a prove it situation where he has to prove that he can contribute to winning basketball, which he hasn't done yet. And if he can show that he can do that, then he'll end up getting paid next off season. But for now, like I said, I like those three teams. Um, like I just feel like LA or Miami gives him a better chance to kind of show, you know, that he can contribute to winning basketball. Because I just feel like there's a scenario with Chicago where like even if he's playing well, the team's just probably not going to be
They're
that
gonna
good.
suck.
So, yeah, so he's not going to be able to showcase anything anyways. Other than what we saw before, where he can put up good numbers for not great teams. But
Right.
if he can do that, for a better team like LA or Miami, that's where I think he can kind of shine.
And if we
Potentially.
rewind the clock, excuse me, like he had some promise back in Houston, like Houston fans and, NBA watchers alike, they were like Christian Wood is the real deal. And then I don't know what happened, and then the whole Dallas thing happened. So hopefully it doesn't happen again. But I do like Miami as well. That would be interesting, for them to have another offensive big, kind of like Bam. But
Yeah,
Bam obviously has the defense, but Christian Wood doesn't. So that would be kind of interesting. But I still
yeah,
like LA a little bit more.
and they signed Thomas Bryant, so they have
True.
another big as well. But again, he's another guy that probably come playoff time isn't going to play.
Yeah,
So
and there's not a lot of
just
guys, that are big men that can, skate through without being a really good defender.
yeah,
Like
that's the tough.
Jokic is Jokic. He's not a great defender, but he's okay. And then like I'm trying to think of
Get
who
away
else.
from his offense.
Yeah, and like who else would really even be in that tier? I mean, like I guess the tier
As
below
a
that.
bonus,
Yeah, I was gonna say the tier below that would be Sabonis. Like, but how far is that really gonna get you? You kind of saw his limitations in the playoffs in
right?
Sacramento. So I don't know. It's really hard to be a great big man in the league, but not
Yeah.
be good at defense. You know what I'm saying? So
I feel like that's
the
one of
role is gonna be interesting.
Yeah, that's one of the positions where I feel like it's very difficult to like get away with not being able to. I mean, you can do it in the because again, Thomas Bryant was able to do it in the regular season.
Right.
But then come playoff time, he wasn't going to get any minutes just because again, like the defense, right? Like they were more comfortable with Aaron Gordon or Jeff Green at center,
Right.
than put they
Which is
even in the
interesting.
game where I think even in the game where like Jokic had the foul trouble or the ankle injury or whichever one it was. I
Right.
can't remember which one. Right, they put DeAndre Jordan in for like a few minutes.
I think
And
that
it's
was the
like,
ankle one.
yeah, so exactly, and that's not a knock on Thomas Bryant. It's just like an acknowledgement of like unless you're Jokic or Embiid or some type of very high level offensive center, you got to be at least decent defensively. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like Jokic's defense in the playoffs, was better. He's
Sure.
not like a rim protector, but he is a decent defensive center. And then Embiid is a solid defensive center as well as a shot blocker. He's more of a rim protector than
Right.
Jokic, right? But again, those guys, it's different because offensively, right, they're much better than your, typical center, right? They're amongst the best offensive players in the league. So,
Right.
Christian Wood isn't there, right? But, as an offensive player, he is pretty good. So it just kind of comes down to, which team wants him, because again, like, you know, again, he's held out so clearly, like, all those teams don't mind waiting for him, so we'll just kind of see, because it
hmm
is interesting because I've heard different things, right? Because I've heard, because obviously, since they're my team, I follow a lot of the Lakers people, right?
hmm
Like some of them have mentioned, that they do think, that Wood may be there, and then some others have also said, like, hey, there's some guys that have influence on the roster that don't want him there, like I think one of the guys for Laker Nation, they were like, yeah, they're you know, uh, one of the players that has like influence on some level of influence on the roster, like, doesn't want him there. I mean, I'm not sure which guy that is. I mean, I can't imagine there's too many guys on the Laker
I think
roster
it's
that would
either
have an
Braun or AD, man.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So
Not to
it's like,
name names, but
yeah, like I can't imagine that, like Cam Reddish has a whole lot of input on the
yeah, or
Laker roster.
AR.
Yeah, so I don't know. So we'll just have, maybe it's D'Lo. So I don't know.
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah, so um and then finally the Suns reportedly they're going to put together a G League team.
Oh yeah, I forgot
And
about
again
that.
like Yeah, exactly. So this is going to be, the last, I believe, team, to have, that doesn't have a G League team. They had one, I think, before, and then I guess it went defunct or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but now they're gonna try to have one, within the next couple of years. So now the G League has grown, because again, like once they come in, they'll be the last team to have one. And it's kind of interesting just to see how the G League has changed, because at one point, it was the D League, the developmental league, and it had a lot more of a negative,
Yes, it was bad.
connotation to it, where a lot of people just assume if you're in the D League that you just kind of just stink.
Right.
Which wasn't necessarily the case. It's just like it also wasn't really used, even though it was called the developmental league. Like,
They didn't use it for that.
yeah, exactly. Like, the setup and the infrastructure wasn't the same. And now it's a lot different. Now now a lot of teams, will use the G League, as a way to, kind of like develop guys in house. We've even seen, guys come out of high school go
G
into the
League
G
Ignite
League.
now, you know?
Exactly with the G. Yeah, exactly. That's how Scoot Henderson, got in. Right. He decided not to go to college and he went to the G League Ignite, balled out
Balled
and was the
out, yeah.
number. Exactly. So I mean, it is kind of interesting. And for the Suns, it's kind of funny, that they decide to do it now. When they're not going to have too many draft picks.
Right.
They did get some second round picks back in the last couple of deals that they made, but still, like just kind of interesting. But
Yeah.
regardless, um, it's more so just kind of like a look at like the G League and just like how it's changed just because again like at one point it was kind of looked at sort of as a joke in a way where people would
Yeah.
always make jokes about like how bad it was where like people would be like oh I could play in the D League and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like I think they even had like they even had
They
tryouts. I
do,
think I
yes.
remember, yeah, because I remember like I think for Golden State there was like a guy who was like I think in his like 70s and he tried out
Oh wow.
for D League roster. You didn't make it,
Right,
obviously,
right,
right?
right.
But just in general, right? Like the D League was looked at very differently, compared to how it is now.
Yeah, and like my timeline might be messed up here, so correct me if I'm wrong. But we've even seen, in special cases like with Clay Thompson when he was rehabbing his injury, they sent him
Right.
down to I think it was the G League at that point. So
It was.
we've seen it be used as a multi tool of some sorts. And it's really akin to what baseball has. If you follow baseball, they have the minor league, so it's kind of akin to that, where it could be a huge gateway for a lot of people, and an opportunity to prove yourself. You've got some household names in there, like, some guys who, could potentially be called up if they play at a phenomenal level, like, I'm trying to think off of the top of my head, like, you have Sharif Coopers who are dropping like 30 points in there. Obviously, he's probably not going to get a great NBA chance because of his size, but,
Yeah.
the potential is there. So it's just really
DeAndre
cool to
Ingram,
see.
had 20
Exactly.
points. Yeah. So,
Right.
uh, yeah. So I guess like kind of like to end like in a funny way, I suppose.
Hmm.
Like, do you have like a name that you would like the Suns G League team to be? Because like the
Hmm.
G League team kind of different. Where like in the past they had like kind of like rec league-ish
Right,
names,
right, right.
but like now some of them kind of just match, their
Yeah.
parents, I guess. But like, what are you thinking? Because like, I mean, unless it would just be like something Sun.
Okay, well, I can
Uh,
name a few. The first one is more of a joke. The Cacti. I don't think that's going to be their name. The
okay,
second one I think would probably be a little bit more kosher, and that's like something like the Apollos or something like Greek mythology related to a sun. Because
yeah,
I think the WNBA team is the Mercury, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken,
you
right?
can't
So
do that.
yeah, so like maybe something along the lines of like a mythological uh sun god or goddess or something like that. I think that would be pretty cool because you can't
The
take heat.
Yeah, no, you can't. The Phoenix Venus Eye.
Yeah, Venus Eye, like I don't know, something related
Yeah,
to the sun or heat.
right. Yeah, or yeah, exactly. Cacti is kind of a funny one.
Yeah,
Uh,
the
yeah,
cacti,
so
man, they gonna cook up.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, so I mean, but it is kind of interesting because again, like at different points, there were some, weird, D League and G League names. I mean, like, because I
Hence the
remember, I
go
think,
go. I know it's
yeah,
like it's a genre of music, but
yeah,
it's still a
exactly.
weird team name.
Right? Or like there was what was I think the Clippers one at one point. It was like the Agua Caliente Clippers, which I guess is like a brand name.
Yeah.
I remember like Maine Red Claws was
Mm-hmm.
kind of one. I think there was like a random one where it was like Charleston Low Gators.
Yeah, like some of these teams, like I could create that on 2K.
I'm looking at these. Yeah, I'm looking at some of these Roanoke Dazzle, Colorado 14ers, Tulsa 66ers. I mean, Arkansas Rim Rockers, Fort
Yeah,
Wayne
I don't
Mad.
know about those, man.
Yeah, but yeah, they kind of sound like high school
Yeah,
rec league-ish
right.
names. But regardless, shout out to the Suns, for doing the G League.
Yeah, it's a big step.
Again, like yeah, exactly. It's a big step forward because again, like you need kind of like those developmental spots for players because again, like even if a guy doesn't play for you, it's another opportunity for a young guy to play somewhere and then maybe catch on somewhere else,
Right,
right? Whether or not in the NBA or even overseas, it
exactly.
just gives guys more opportunities, and that's what we want.
Right, all for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, if you agree, or disagree, with our take on the Warriors roster, you can leave it in the comments. Again, like my co-host mentioned, obviously we appreciate, the comments, and the likes, and the support, on our previous videos, including our blog, our Vegas live in person
Yeah,
podcast, as well as all the other things that we do, and again, we're continuing to have, big stuff coming up. Obviously, at this point, it is kind of a dog days, dry spot in the NBA. Obviously a trade could happen at any point. But again, we're still, we're gonna keep growing. We're gonna keep putting out content, for everybody. So, you know, if it's we appreciate it when you leave likes, and comment and subscribe as well. So,
yeah.
thanks for listening. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday.